The ship was dying. Katie Monroe could hear the metal screaming as the hull broke apart around her. Fire burned through the corridors of the Starbound Hope, and the screams of her crew filled the air before going silent one by one. She ran through the smoke, her lungs burning, her eyes watering. She had been the commander of this vessel for 3 years. She had led 42 men and women into the unknown reaches of space. Now she was watching them die. The attack had come without warning. One moment they were scanning a distant planet for signs of life. The next moment, a massive ship had appeared from nowhere and opened fire. The weapons were unlike anything Katie had ever seen. They cut through the shields like they were made of paper. They turned metal into liquid fire. Katie reached the escape pod bay just as the ceiling collapsed behind her. She threw herself inside the nearest pod and slammed the launch button. The small vessel shot away from the Starbound Hope just as the main reactor exploded. Through the tiny window, Katie watched her ship become a ball of orange flame. She watched her crew, her friends, her family become nothing but dust and memory. And she watched the alien vessel move closer, its dark hull blocking out the stars. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply sat there and waited for death. But death did not come. Instead, a beam of light surrounded her pod and pulled it toward the alien ship. Katie felt her stomach drop as she was dragged through space like a fish caught on a line. The pod crashed onto a hard metal floor inside a massive hangar bay. Katie barely had time to catch her breath before the door was ripped open and clawed hands grabbed her arms. She got her first look at her captors. They were tall, at least 7 feet, with thick scales covering their bodies. Their eyes were yellow with black slits, like the eyes of snakes. Their mouths were filled with sharp teeth, and their hands ended in curved claws that looked like they could tear through steel. They spoke to each other in a harsh language that sounded like rocks grinding together. Katie did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. They were laughing at her. One of them grabbed her chin and forced her to look up. He studied her face with cold amusement, then said something to his companions. They all laughed again. Katie was dragged through corridors made of black metal. The ship was enormous, larger than anything humans had ever built. Everywhere she looked, she saw more of the reptilian creatures. They watched her pass with the same look in their eyes. It was the look of a predator watching prey. Finally, she was brought to a massive chamber filled with strange machines and glowing screens. At the center of the room sat a throne made of bones. On the throne sat the largest of the creatures Katie had seen. His scales were darker than the others, almost black, and his eyes burned with cruel intelligence. The guards threw Katie to the floor at his feet. The creature on the throne leaned forward and studied her. He spoke, and this time Katie understood the words. A small device in her ear was translating his speech. "This is what the humans send into the stars?" he said. His voice was deep and filled with contempt. A small, soft creature with no claws, no armor, no venom. "Are there no warriors among your kind?" Katie looked up at him. Her body was bruised and bleeding. Her uniform was torn. She had just watched everyone she cared about die. But she did not look away. "I am Commander Katie Monroe of the Earth Alliance vessel Starbound Hope," she said. "You attacked us without cause and murdered my crew. I demand to know why." The chamber went silent. The guards looked at each other in surprise. The creature on the throne tilted his head, studying Katie with new interest. Then he laughed. It was a terrible sound, like thunder mixed with breaking glass. "Demand?" he repeated. "The animal demands? How amusing." He rose from his throne and walked toward her. Each step made the floor shake. "I am High Commander Zyreth of the Vexari Empire. We have conquered 47 star systems. We have crushed species that could break mountains with their bare hands. We have destroyed civilizations that existed before your kind learned to make fire." He stopped directly in front of Katie and looked down at her. Your species is nothing to us. We took your ship because it entered our territory. We killed your crew because they were worthless, and we kept you alive because you might be useful as a slave. He turned to his guards. Place her with the other livestock. Katie was dragged away from the throne room and taken deep into the belly of the ship. The corridors became darker and narrower. The air became thick with the smell of fear and suffering. Finally, she was thrown into a large cell filled with other prisoners. The energy barrier hummed behind her as the guards walked away. Katie slowly got to her feet and looked around. The cell was crowded with creatures of every shape and size. Some had fur, some had feathers, some had skin that changed color. All of them looked broken. All of them looked like they had given up hope. An old creature approached her. He walked on 4 legs and had a long face covered with gray fur. His eyes were tired but kind. "You are the human," he said. "I heard them talking about you. I am Sorath. I have been a prisoner here for 30 cycles." 30 cycles? Katie repeated. 30 of your years, more or less, Sorath said. The Vexari do not kill their prisoners quickly. They prefer to use us. Work us until we break. Then they throw us away. Katie looked around the cell again. She counted the guards. She studied the walls. She noticed where the power lines ran along the ceiling. There must be a way out, she said. Sorath shook his head sadly. Many have tried. All have failed. The Vexari are too strong, too organized, too prepared. It is better to accept your fate, human. Resistance only brings pain. Katie did not respond. She was too busy thinking. The Vexari had looked at her and seen a small, weak creature. They had seen soft skin and dull teeth and fragile bones. They had laughed at her and called her livestock. They had made a terrible mistake. They did not know what humans were capable of. They did not know about the ice ages humanity had survived. They did not know about the predators humans had hunted to extinction. They did not know about the wars, the plagues, the disasters that had killed millions but never broken the human spirit. They looked at her body and saw weakness. The days passed slowly in the prison hold of the Dominion's edge. Katie learned to count time by the meals the guards brought twice each day. The food was barely enough to survive on, thin soup and hard bread that tasted like dirt. But Katie ate every bite and never complained. She had a plan, and survival was the first step. The other prisoners watched her with curiosity at first. They had seen many species come through these cells. Most of them cried. Most of them begged. Most of them broke within the first week. Katie did none of these things. She sat quietly in her corner and watched. She listened. She learned. The guards spoke freely around the prisoners, believing none of them could understand the Vexari language. But Katie had a gift for languages. She had learned 6 of them during her time in the Earth Alliance military. Within 2 weeks, she understood most of what the guards were saying. She learned that the Dominion's Edge was the flagship of the Vexari Third Fleet. She learned that High Commander Zyreth was one of the most feared leaders in the Empire. She learned that the ship carried over 10,000 soldiers and enough weapons to destroy a planet. She also learned something more useful. The guards were lazy. They had been conquering weak species for so long that they had forgotten what a real threat looked like. They left doors unlocked. They spoke about security codes in front of prisoners. They never searched the cells carefully. Katie began to gather information like a spider building a web. One night she approached the old prisoner named Sorath. He was lying in his usual spot, his tired eyes staring at the ceiling. "Tell me about the other prisoners," Katie said quietly. "Who has useful skills?" Sorath looked at her with surprise. "Why do you ask such things?" "Because I am going to get us out of here," Katie said, "and I need to know who can help." Sorath was quiet for a long moment. Then he let out a sound that might have been a laugh. You truly believe you can escape this place? Humans must be either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both, Katie said. Now tell me about the prisoners. Sorath sighed, but he began to speak. He told Katie about Drix, a Kethrani engineer who had once built starships before the Vexari destroyed his world. He told her about Mira, a young Velian woman who had been training as a warrior before she was captured. He told her about Theron, a Morvain healer who knew more about alien biology than anyone else on the ship. Katie memorized every name and every skill. Over the following days, she approached each of them one by one. Drix was difficult to convince at first. He was a small creature with blue skin and 4 arms, and his eyes held the emptiness of someone who had lost everything. "What is the point of escape?" he asked Katie. "My world is gone. My family is dead. Even if I leave this ship, I have nowhere to go." "Then help me destroy the ones who took everything from you," Katie said. "Help me make sure they never do this to anyone else." Something flickered in Drix's eyes. It was small, but it was there. A spark of anger that had not quite died. "The Vexari power core," he said slowly. "I have studied it through the walls. I can hear the machines." "There is a weakness in the design, a vulnerability to certain frequencies of energy." Katie smiled. "Tell me more." Mira was easier to recruit. The young Velian was full of rage that she had been forced to hide. Her people were warriors, proud and strong. Being kept as livestock was worse than death to her. "Give me a weapon," Mira said, her golden eyes burning. "Give me a chance to fight, and I will follow you anywhere." "Soon," Katie promised. "But first we need a plan. A real plan. Can you be patient?" Mira did not like patience, but she nodded. Theron the healer was the most cautious of all. His species did not believe in violence. They valued life above all things, but even he could not ignore what the Vexari had done. "I will not kill," he told Katie, "but I will heal those who fight. And I will use my knowledge to help you succeed." That was enough. Slowly, carefully, Katie built her network. She taught the prisoners to communicate using hand signals that the guards could not understand. She had them scratch-coded messages into the food trays that were passed between cells. She created a chain of information that spread through the entire prison hold without the Vexari ever noticing. The guards continued to ignore her. To them, she was just another piece of livestock. A small, weak human who sat quietly in her corner and caused no trouble. One day, a guard caught Katie speaking with Drix. The massive reptile grabbed her by the throat and lifted her off the ground. "What are you doing, animal?" he hissed. "What were you saying to the Kethrani?" Katie made her voice small and afraid. "Nothing, master. I was only asking about the food. I did not mean to cause trouble." The guard stared at her for a long moment. Then he threw her to the ground and struck her across the face with the back of his clawed hand. "Know your place, livestock," he growled. "Speak again without permission, and I will remove your tongue." He walked away, laughing with the other guards. Katie wiped the blood from her lip. Her face hurt, but she did not care. The guard had not searched her. He had not noticed the stolen access chip hidden in her sleeve. He had not realized that she had memorized the security code he had entered on the door panel. She looked up at his back as he walked away. "I will remember your face," she whispered to herself. That night, Katie gathered her closest allies in the darkest corner of the cell. Drix, Mira, Theron, and Sorath sat with her in a tight circle, their voices barely above whispers. "The Vexari have a religious ceremony in 3 days," Katie said. "Most of the crew will gather in the main hall. The ship will be understaffed. That is when we strike." "How do we get out of the cell?" Mira asked. Katie showed them the access chip. "I took this from a guard 2 days ago, and I have watched them enter the codes hundreds of times. I know how to open the doors." And then what? Sorath asked. His voice was doubtful, but Katie could see something new in his old eyes. Hope. We free the other prisoners. We take the armory. We capture the engineering section. Katie looked at each of them in turn. And then we take this ship. Drix shook his head slowly. There are 10,000 Vexari soldiers on this vessel. We are less than 100 prisoners, most of us weak and starving. How can we possibly win? Katie smiled. It was not a kind smile. Because they think we are animals, she said. They think we are broken. They think we have given up. They will not see us coming until it is too late. She leaned closer, and her voice dropped even lower. The night of the Vexari ceremony arrived. Katie could hear the drums echoing through the ship, deep and slow like the heartbeat of some massive beast. The guards had been drinking some kind of ceremonial liquid, and their movements were slower than usual. It was time. Katie gathered her people in the center of the cell. 23 prisoners, the strongest and most willing from the entire hold. They were thin and tired, but their eyes were bright with desperate hope. Remember the plan, Katie whispered. No noise until we reach the armory. Move fast, stay together, and trust each other. She moved to the cell door and pressed the stolen access chip against the panel. The light turned from red to green. She entered the security code she had memorized, and the energy barrier flickered and died. For a moment, no one moved. They had been behind that barrier for so long that freedom seemed impossible. Then Mira stepped forward, her fists clenched, her jaw tight with determination. "Let us go," she said. They moved through the corridors like shadows. Katie led the way, her bare feet silent on the cold metal floor. Behind her came Mira and the other fighters. Drix and the engineers followed them. Theron and the healers stayed in the middle, protected. The first guard they encountered was alone, standing at a junction point and looking at something on his personal device. He did not even notice Katie until she was right behind him. She had spent weeks making a weapon. A piece of metal torn from a food tray, sharpened against the stone wall of her cell for hours each night. It was not elegant, but it was sharp. The guard started to turn. Katie struck. She had studied Vexari biology carefully. She had listened to Theron explain their weaknesses. She knew that their scales were thick everywhere except one place, a small gap at the base of their necks where the major blood vessels ran close to the surface. Her makeshift blade found that gap perfectly. The guard made a wet choking sound and collapsed. Katie caught his body and lowered it quietly to the floor. She took his weapon, a plasma pistol, and handed it to Mira. "One down," Katie whispered. They kept moving. The next two guards were together, walking a patrol route that Katie had memorized weeks ago. She knew exactly where they would be and exactly when they would pass. Katie sent Mira and two Velian fighters ahead. They waited in the shadows of a storage alcove. When the guards walked past, they struck from behind. It was brutal and fast. The guards died without making a sound. Now they had 3 plasma pistols. Katie kept moving. The armory was on the 4th level, protected by a heavy door and 2 guards. Katie approached alone while her people waited around the corner. She made herself look small and scared. She stumbled toward the guards with tears streaming down her face. "Please," she cried, "please help me. The other prisoners, they are fighting. They are going to kill me." The guards looked at each other in confusion. One of them stepped forward, his weapon half raised. "How did you get out of the cell, animal?" "I do not know," Katie sobbed. "The door just opened. Please, you have to help me. They are coming." The guard reached for her arm, probably to drag her back to the prison hold. That was when Katie's people attacked from behind. The fight was short and violent. Mira moved like a storm, her borrowed plasma pistol firing with deadly accuracy. The Velian fighters used their natural strength to overwhelm the Vexari guards. Within seconds, both guards were dead on the floor. Katie stepped over the bodies and used the access chip on the armory door. It slid open, revealing racks of weapons stretching back into the darkness. Plasma rifles, energy grenades, armor suits. Everything they needed. "Arm yourselves," Katie said. "Take everything you can carry." While her people grabbed weapons, Katie found a communication terminal on the wall. She entered the codes she had memorized and accessed the ship's internal network. "Drix," she called, "can you disable the alarm system from here?" The Kathrani engineer hurried over, his 4 hands dancing across the controls. "Give me 30 seconds." Katie counted the seconds in her head. At exactly 30, Drix nodded. "The alarms are dead. They will not know we are coming until we are already there." Katie smiled grimly. "Good. Now let us take engineering." They split into 2 groups. Katie led the main force toward the engineering section, while Mira took a smaller team to free the remaining prisoners. They would need every body they could get for what was coming. The corridors were nearly empty. Most of the crew was still at the ceremony, drinking and praying to their violent gods. Katie's group encountered only scattered resistance. Guards who were drunk or surprised or simply unprepared for the nightmare coming toward them. Katie showed no mercy. She could not afford to. Every guard who escaped would raise the alarm. Every hesitation could cost them everything. She thought about her crew on the Starbound Hope. She thought about their faces as they died. She thought about High Commander Zyrith laughing as he called her livestock. Her hands did not shake when she pulled the trigger. They reached engineering just as the ship's main power core came into view through a massive window. It was beautiful in a terrible way. A swirling ball of contained energy that powered the entire vessel. "Drix," Katie said. "Can you do it from here?" The engineer studied the consoles, his eyes moving rapidly across the displays. "Yes, I can set up an electromagnetic pulse that will disable their weapons and shields, but I will need at least 20 minutes. "You have 10, Katie said. "Make it work." She turned to her fighters. "Secure this section. Block every entrance. No one gets through." They spread out, taking positions at every door and junction. Katie stayed by the main entrance, her plasma rifle ready. The first wave of Vexari soldiers arrived 8 minutes later. Someone had finally noticed the missing guards. Someone had finally realized that something was wrong. And now they were coming. A stream of scaled warriors pouring through the corridors with weapons blazing. Katie's people held the line. They had better positions, better cover, and most importantly, they had something to fight for. The Vexari had treated them like animals for too long. Now the animals were biting back. Mira arrived with the freed prisoners just as the fighting became desperate. 40 more bodies joined the defense, armed with weapons from the armory. Some of them had never held a gun before. Some of them were still weak from captivity, but all of them were angry. "How much longer?" Katie shouted to Drix. 2 minutes, the engineer called back. The longest 2 minutes of Katie's life. She fired until her weapon overheated. She watched prisoners fall beside her, their bodies torn apart by plasma fire. She saw Sorath take a shot meant for her, the old creature collapsing with a smile on his face. "Get them out," Sorath whispered as he died. "Finish what you started." Katie screamed in rage and grief and kept fighting. Then Drix shouted, "It is done!" The lights flickered. The enemy weapons sparked and died. The great power core pulsed once and then stabilized at a much lower level. The Vexari soldiers stared at their useless guns in confusion. Katie did not give them time to recover. High Commander Zyrith stood on the bridge of the Dominion's edge, watching the chaos unfold on his display screens. His clawed hands gripped the arms of his command chair so hard that the metal groaned. "How is this possible?" he hissed. His second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Krath, pulled up the security feeds from across the ship. They showed corridors filled with bodies. They showed prisoners armed with Vexari weapons, moving through the lower decks like an organized army, and at the center of it all, they showed a small human woman directing every movement. "She has taken engineering," Krath reported, his voice tight with disbelief. "The electromagnetic pulse disabled our weapons and shields throughout the lower sections. Our soldiers are being pushed back on every level." "It is one human," Zyreth growled. "One weak, pathetic human. How has she done this?" Krath was silent for a moment. Then he said something that made Zyreth's blood run cold. "She is not a warrior, High Commander. She is a strategist. She planned this for weeks, maybe months. Every move, every attack, every target. She knew our patrol routes. She knew our security codes. She knew exactly when and where to strike." Zyreth stared at the screen showing Katie Monroe. She was covered in blood and ash, her human face twisted with determination. She was pointing down a corridor, sending a group of Velian fighters toward the next objective. "We looked at her and saw prey," Krath continued quietly. "We should have looked closer." Zyreth slammed his fist against the chair. "Enough. Seal the bridge. Recall all soldiers to the upper levels. We will crush this rebellion and make an example of every prisoner who dared to raise a weapon." The orders went out, but it was already too late. Katie had anticipated this response. She had planned for it. While the Vexari soldiers retreated to the upper levels, her teams were already moving through maintenance tunnels and ventilation shafts. Drix had found the ship's blueprints in the engineering computers. He had shown Katie every secret passage, every forgotten pathway, every weakness in the vessel's design. The Vexari thought they were consolidating their forces. They did not realize they were walking into a trap. Katie led the main assault force through the central stairwell, while Mira took a team through the portside tunnels. A third group, led by a young Kathrani named Vorn, moved through the starboard maintenance corridors. They hit the upper levels from 3 directions at once. The fighting was brutal. The Vexari had restored some of their weapons using backup power cells, and they fought with the desperation of cornered predators. But Katie's army had numbers now. Hundreds of freed prisoners from every species the Vexari had conquered. All of them willing to die for freedom. And they had something else. They had Katie. She moved through the battle like a ghost. She did not fight on the front lines. She did not need to. She was everywhere at once, appearing behind enemy positions, redirecting forces where they were needed most, exploiting every weakness before the Vexari even knew it existed. When a group of Vexari soldiers barricaded themselves in a storage room, Katie had her people cut through the floor from below. When the enemy set up a defensive position in the main corridor, she had Drix reroute the power to that section, flooding the hallway with vented plasma that drove them out. When a squad of elite Vexari warriors pushed back against the prisoner forces, Katie led a team of Velian fighters through the air ducts and dropped directly behind them. Every time the Vexari thought they had found safety, Katie proved them wrong. Every time they tried to organize a counterattack, she was already 3 steps ahead. The battle lasted 6 hours. At the end of those 6 hours, the prisoners controlled everything except the bridge. Hundreds of Vexari soldiers lay dead throughout the ship. The survivors had either surrendered or retreated to protect their commander. Katie stood before the bridge doors, her plasma rifle in her hands, her body aching from exhaustion. Around her stood what remained of her army. They had lost many during the fighting, good people who had died for the dream of freedom. But they had won. "Open the doors," Katie said. Drix moved to the wall panel. His 4 hands worked quickly, bypassing security protocols and override codes. After a few minutes, he stepped back. "Ready when you are." Katie looked at the prisoners around her. Mira stood at her right side, her golden eyes burning with rage. Theron, the healer, was treating the wounded nearby, his gentle hands never stopping even as he watched the doors. Dozens of species, dozens of worlds, all united by their hatred of the Vexari. When those doors open, we end this, Katie said. Xyrith took everything from us. Our homes, our families, our freedom. Now we take something from him. She raised her weapon. We take his power. The doors exploded inward, and Katie led the charge onto the bridge. High Commander Xyrith was waiting for them. He stood in the center of the bridge with his personal guard, 12 of the largest and most brutal Vexari warriors Katie had ever seen. They were armed with ceremonial blades, weapons designed for close combat where plasma rifles would be too dangerous on a ship's bridge. Behind them, the bridge crew had retreated to the edges of the room. They were unarmed, their faces filled with fear. Xyrith drew his own blade. It was massive, curved, and covered with carved symbols. Katie had learned enough about Vexari culture to know what those symbols meant. This blade had killed over 100 enemy leaders. It was a weapon of conquest. "So," Xyrith said, his voice calm despite everything, "the livestock has learned to fight." Katie stopped a few meters away from him, her rifle aimed at his chest. Her people spread out behind her, covering the bridge crew and the guards. "Put down your weapons," Katie said. "It is over." Xyrith laughed. It was the same terrible sound she had heard when she first stood before him as a prisoner. "You think you have won?" He shook his head slowly. "You have taken one ship. One single ship out of thousands. Even if you escape, even if you kill me, the Empire will send 100 vessels to hunt you down. They will find your world. They will burn it to ash. Every human, every man, woman, and child will die screaming because of what you have done here." Katie lowered her rifle. Xyrith smiled, thinking she had finally understood the hopelessness of her situation. "I know," Katie said. The smile faded from Xyrith's face. "I know the Empire will come for revenge," Katie continued. "I know they will send fleets. I know they will try to destroy my world." She took a step forward. "I am counting on it." She let the rifle fall to her side and looked directly into Xyrith's yellow eyes. "You built your empire on fear. You conquered species by making them believe resistance was impossible. But today, we proved that was a lie." She gestured at the prisoners behind her. "Look at them. A dozen different worlds. Species that had never worked together before today. All of them watching as a single human brought down the flagship of the Vexari Third Fleet." Her voice hardened. "The Empire will come for revenge, and every slave in every system will know that revenge is possible. They will know that the mighty Vexari can be beaten. They will know that all it takes is one person who refuses to give up." She stepped even closer, until she was within arm's reach of Xyrith's blade. "You did not just lose a ship today, High Commander. You lost the fear that held your empire together." Xyrith's face twisted with rage. He raised his ceremonial blade and swung at Katie's head with all his strength. He was fast. He was powerful. He was a warrior who had killed hundreds, but Katie was faster. She had been waiting for that swing. She ducked under the blade and drove her elbow into the gap in his neck scales, the same vulnerability she had learned about weeks ago. Xyrith staggered back, choking. And then the prisoners surged forward. It was not a battle. It was a reckoning. Every species Xyrith had conquered, every people he had enslaved, every world he had destroyed. They fell upon him and his guards with all the rage of 1,000 broken lives. When it was over, Katie stood over Xyrith's body. The bridge was silent, except for the sound of heavy breathing and the hum of the ship's systems. She looked down at the creature who had called her livestock. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," she said quietly. Then she turned to face her army. "This ship is ours. But our work is not done." She pointed at the view screen, which showed the stars stretching into infinity. "Out there are billions of slaves waiting for someone to show them the way, waiting for proof that the Vexari can fall." 6 months had passed since the fall of the Dominion's edge. In that time, the galaxy had changed. News of the impossible victory had spread like fire through dry grass, carried by escaped prisoners and transmitted on hidden frequencies. Slaves in every corner of Vexari space heard the story. A single human woman had taken a flagship. A single human woman had killed High Commander Zyrith. A single human woman had proven that the Empire could bleed. The rebellion spread faster than anyone could have imagined. On Kethra, the remaining engineers rose up against their Vexari masters and sabotaged the shipyards that built the Empire's war fleet. On Velia, young warriors who had hidden their strength for generations emerged from hiding and attacked the occupation forces. On Morva, the peaceful healers turned their knowledge of biology into weapons, creating diseases that affected only Vexari soldiers. Everywhere the Empire turned, there was fire. Everywhere they looked, there was resistance. And everywhere the fighting happened, the slaves whispered the same name: Katie Monroe, the human, the doom of tyrants. Katie herself stood on the bridge of the ship she had captured, now renamed the Defiance. The vessel had been repaired and improved over the past months, its weapons upgraded, its crew expanded. What had once been a prison ship was now the flagship of a growing armada. Mira stood at her right side, the young Velian now a hardened commander in her own right. She led the fighter squadrons that protected the fleet, and she had never lost an engagement. Drix stood at her left, the Kethrani engineer now responsible for keeping the entire rebellion supplied with weapons and ships. His 4 hands were always moving, always building, always creating new ways to hurt the Empire. Theron moved among the wounded in the medical bay below, saving lives that would have been lost without his skill. He still refused to kill, but he had become just as important to the rebellion as any warrior, and around them, spread across dozens of captured vessels, were the freed slaves of 47 worlds, Kethrani and Velians, Morvanes and Sorans, species that had never met before the Vexari conquered them, now fighting side by side against a common enemy. Katie looked at the view screen. It showed the Vexari homeworld, a planet of black rock and red oceans, the capital of an empire that had ruled through fear for 1,000 years. Today, that empire would end. "Status report," Katie said. "All ships in position," Mira responded. "Fighter squadrons ready. Ground assault teams standing by." "The orbital defense platforms are down," Drix added. "Our saboteurs inside the system did their work perfectly." Katie nodded. They had spent months preparing for this moment. Recruiting agents inside the Vexari systems, planting explosives on key targets, turning the Empire's own slaves against them. The Vexari had conquered through fear. Katie had learned to use that same weapon against them. "Open a channel," she said. "All frequencies. I want every being in this system to hear this." A light on her console turned green. Katie stepped forward and spoke. "Attention, Vexari Empire. This is Katie Monroe, commander of the Free Worlds Alliance. 6 months ago, you captured me and called me livestock. You looked at my species and saw weakness. You thought humans were nothing but prey." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You were wrong." On the view screen, the Vexari defense fleet began to move. Hundreds of ships, desperate to protect their homeworld, but they were too late. The rebellion had been planning this attack for too long. Every approach was covered. Every escape route was blocked. "Your empire was built on slavery and fear," Katie continued. "You conquered worlds because you thought no one could stop you. But today, the slaves have risen. Today, the fear ends. Today, you learn what happens when you push a galaxy too far." She looked at Mira and nodded. "All ships," Mira commanded. "Attack." The Battle of Vexar Prime lasted 3 days. The Vexari fought with everything they had. They were defending their home, their families, their entire way of life. They threw every ship and soldier they had left into the battle. It was not enough. The rebellion had numbers, it had motivation, it had allies from every conquered world working together for the first time in history, but most importantly, it had Katie Monroe, the woman who had turned strategic planning into an art form. She directed the battle from the bridge of the Defiance, seeing patterns and opportunities that no one else could see. When the Vexari tried to concentrate their forces, she split them apart with coordinated strikes. When they tried to flee, she had ships waiting to cut them off. When they tried to surrender, she showed them the same mercy they had shown to the millions they had enslaved. None. On the third day, the last Vexari battleship was destroyed, and the rebellion's ground forces landed on the planet below. Katie did not lead the ground assault. Her days of fighting hand-to-hand were over. She had generals now, commanders trained in the brutal art of war. Her job was to direct the larger picture, to make sure the victory meant something. She watched from orbit as the Vexari capital burned. She felt nothing. The Empire had killed her crew. It had killed millions of innocents across dozens of worlds. It had called sentient beings livestock and worked them to death for profit and power. She had not started this war, but she had ended it. When the fighting was over, representatives from every free world gathered on the surface of Vexar Prime. They met in the ruins of the Imperial Palace, surrounded by the rubble of a fallen empire. "What do we do now?" Drix asked. "The Vexari are defeated, but the galaxy is in chaos. Someone needs to lead." Every eye in the room turned to Katie. She stood among the delegates, still wearing the same simple uniform she had worn since the beginning. No medals, no fancy clothes, no symbols of power. Just a human woman who had done what needed to be done. "I did not fight for power," she said. "I fought for freedom. For all of us." She looked around at the gathered species, creatures of every shape and color, united by shared suffering and shared victory. "We will build something new," she continued. "Not an empire, not a system of masters and slaves, a coalition, a partnership of free worlds where every species has a voice." "And who will lead this coalition?" asked a Morvain elder. Katie smiled for the first time in months. "We all will. Together. That is the point." The Free Worlds Alliance was formed that day. It took years to build, years of negotiation and compromise and hard work. There were disagreements, there were setbacks, there were moments when it seemed like the coalition would fall apart, but it held. Because every time someone suggested going back to the old ways, the old systems of power and control, someone would remind them of how they had gotten here. A single human woman had shown them what was possible. A single human woman had refused to accept that slavery was inevitable. A single human woman had looked at an empire that had conquered 47 worlds and said, "No more." Katie lived for many more years. She never took a title. She never sat on a throne. She simply continued to do what she had always done, helping those who needed help, fighting those who needed to be fought, and reminding the galaxy what one person could accomplish when they refused to give up. When she finally died, old and tired but at peace, the entire alliance mourned. Every world flew their flags at half-staff. Every species that had once been enslaved took a moment to remember the woman who had set them free. History remembered her by many names: the Liberator, the Ghost of the Dominion, the Doom of Tyrants, the Mother of the Free Worlds. But to those who had fought beside her, she was simply Katie, the small, soft creature with no claws, no armor, and no venom, the one the Vexari should never have underestimated. On her grave, they carved a simple message. It was written in every language of the Alliance, so that all could read it. She was human. She was one, and she changed everything. Years later, a young child from a species that had been freed by the rebellion visited her memorial. The child looked up at the statue of Katie Monroe and asked their parent a question. Why did the Vexari lose? They were so big and strong. The parent knelt down and smiled. Because they made a mistake. They looked at humans and saw weak bodies. They saw no claws, no scales, no natural weapons. They thought that meant humans were easy to defeat. The parent pointed at the statue. But inside that small body was a mind sharper than any claw, a will harder than any scale, a spirit that would not break no matter what they did to her. The Vexari conquered species that were bigger and stronger than humans, but they had never faced anything as dangerous as a human who had nothing left to lose. The child looked at the statue for a long moment. I want to be like her when I grow up. The parents smiled and took their child's hand. We all do. That is why we remember. And across the free galaxy, in 1,000 different ways, the story was told and retold. The story of the human who became the doom of empires. The story of Katie Monroe. The end. Her voice rose, filling the bridge. We will be that proof. We will take this ship to every corner of Vexari space. We will free every prisoner. We will arm every rebellion. And we will not stop until the Empire is nothing but ash and memory. The prisoners roared their approval. Katie did not smile. There was too much work ahead for celebration. But somewhere deep inside her, she felt something she had not felt since the Starbound Hope died. Hope. Now! She roared. Take them down! Her people surged forward. Without their weapons, the Vexari were forced to fight with claws and teeth. They were still dangerous, still strong, but they were no longer unstoppable. And Katie's army had spent too long being afraid to stop now. When the last soldier fell, Katie stood in the center of engineering, surrounded by bodies and blood. Her people cheered around her, their voices hoarse with exhaustion and triumph. But Katie did not celebrate. She looked up at the ceiling, toward the bridge, where High Commander Zyrith was surely watching the chaos unfold. Half the ship is ours, she said quietly. Now we take the rest. On my world, we have a saying. The most dangerous creature is not the one with the biggest claws. It is the one that has nothing left to lose. She looked around at the faces of her allies. The broken engineer, the young warrior, the peaceful healer, the old prisoner who had forgotten what hope felt like. They took everything from us, Katie said. Our homes, our families, our freedom. They left us with nothing but our lives and our anger. Her eyes hardened. Now we are going to show them what that anger can do. They never thought to look at her mind. Katie sat down in a corner of the cell and closed her eyes. She would mourn her crew later. She would grieve for her friends when she had time. Right now, she had work to do. She was going to learn everything about this ship. She was going to find every weakness. She was going to make allies among these broken prisoners. And then she was going to make the Vexari pay for what they had done. They had underestimated her because she was human. That would be the last mistake they ever made.